In what would become the most extraordinary transformation in Riverside Valley's history, a simple act of defiance changed everything when a group of notorious bikers chose the wrong farmer to intimidate. What started as a confrontation would evolve into an extraordinary story of redemption that no one could have predicted, turning hardened criminals into protectors of the very community they once terrorized. The early morning mist hadn't yet lifted from the fields, as Michael Harrison worked methodically through his organic vegetable rows. His muscular frame moved with quiet efficiency, checking irrigation lines with the same precision he once used to check tactical gear. 20 years as a Marine Force Recon Commander had taught him to start early, stay vigilant, and verify every detail. Each movement was purposeful, conserving energy, a habit ingrained through countless covert operations that had kept him alive in places most Americans couldn't find on a map. "Morning, Michael," Emma Thompson's familiar voice carried across the field. The elderly woman made her way toward him, carrying her signature basket of fresh muffins and coffee. The morning sun caught her silver hair like a halo as she navigated between the neat rows of vegetables. "Thought you might need breakfast. You've been out here since before dawn again." Michael straightened up, wiping his hands on his worn jeans. The movement was fluid, betraying none of the old injuries that sometimes made him wince on cold mornings. "Emma, you're spoiling me. Grace would have loved these muffins." His voice softened at the mention of his late wife, gone 3 years now to cancer. "Well, someone has to look after you. Your mother would haunt me if I didn't." Emma set the basket down on a nearby work table. The rich aroma of coffee and fresh-baked blueberry muffins filled the air. "Besides, you're the only one who helps me with my roses. This year's garden competition is mine. The Riverside Garden Club won't know what hit them." As they shared breakfast, the distant rumble of motorcycles echoed through the valley. Emma's face tightened with concern, the joy of moments before evaporating like morning dew. "They're back. 3rd time this week." Michael remained calm, methodically finishing his coffee. His eyes, however, constantly scanned the tree line where the road curved into view. "The dark riders are getting bolder. Sheriff Parker says they've hit 3 farms in the next county." He paused, choosing his next words carefully. "They broke Bill Anderson's leg when he refused to pay their protection money." "His feed store has been in his family for generations," Emma whispered, her hands clutching her worn shawl. "Now he's talking about selling. These thugs are destroying everything our community built." The motorcycles grew louder, the rumble becoming a roar. Michael helped Emma gather her things, his movements unhurried but purposeful. "You should head home. I'll handle this." "Michael Harrison, don't you dare let those thugs intimidate you," Emma warned, but hurried toward her car. Her ancient Buick had barely disappeared around the bend when 12 motorcycles roared up the dirt road to Harrison Farm, kicking up clouds of dust in their wake. Their leader, known as Blade Mitchell, cut an imposing figure in black leather decorated with Dark Rider emblems. His scarred face twisted into what passed for a smile as he surveyed the fertile fields. A jagged scar ran from his left temple to his jaw, a souvenir from a prison fight that had cemented his reputation for brutality. "Nice setup you got here, farmer," Blade called out, killing his engine. The sudden silence felt heavy, pregnant with threat. "Shame if something happened to it." His 11 companions spread out, their boots deliberately crushing seedlings as they walked. They moved with the confidence of men used to intimidation, used to seeing fear in others' eyes. Michael stood quietly, hands relaxed at his sides. To anyone who knew what to look for, his stance would have revealed years of combat training. Weight slightly forward, hands ready, eyes constantly tracking multiple threats. But to these bikers, he was just another poor farmer about to learn a harsh lesson about the new order in Riverside Valley. $5,000 a month keeps your pretty farm safe," Blade continued, pulling on thick gloves studded with metal across the knuckles. "Otherwise," he kicked over a tray of seedlings, sending dirt and tender plants scattering. "Accidents happen. Those were Emma's competition roses," Michael said softly. His voice carried no threat, but something in his tone made 2 of the bikers exchange uncertain glances. There was a stillness to him that felt wrong, like the calm before a storm. Blade didn't notice, too caught up in his own performance. "Oh, the old lady's plant? Maybe we should pay her a visit, too. Bet she'd bake us some nice muffins." His crew laughed on cue, but the sound held a nervous edge. Michael's eyes hardened slightly. Last chance to leave peacefully. After that, things get complicated. The words were simple, but they carried the weight of absolute certainty. The bikers erupted in forced laughter, trying to cover their growing unease. Blade pulled out a heavy chain, wrapping it around his fist. The metal links clinked ominously in the morning air. "Boys, teach Farmer John here what happens when people don't respect the Dark Riders." A massive biker they called Tank moved first, swinging a lead pipe at Michael's head. But Michael wasn't there anymore. With movements honed through countless combat operations, he sidestepped the attack and struck Tank's wrist with surgical precision. The pipe hadn't hit the ground before Tank joined it, gasping for air. "What the hell?" Ghost, another biker, charged forward with a roar. Michael moved like water, redirecting Ghost's momentum into a nearby water trough. The big man surfaced sputtering and shocked, his intimidating image literally all wet. Blade's face contorted with rage as he watched his crew's advantage evaporate. Hawk, wrench, kill him. What happened next would become legend in Riverside Valley, but more importantly, it would set in motion events that would transform not just one farm, but an entire community's understanding of redemption, second chances, and the true meaning of brotherhood. The real battle for Riverside Valley was about to begin, and it would prove that sometimes the greatest victories come not from defeating an enemy, but from transforming them into allies. Two remaining bikers pulled knives, circling Michael cautiously. They attacked together, expecting to overwhelm him. Instead, their coordination worked against them, as Michael used one's momentum to knock down the other. 20 years of force recon training flowed through every movement, each step precise and purposeful. Blade stared in disbelief as his crew lay groaning on the ground. "You're dead, Farmer." He swung his chain in a deadly arc. Michael caught it with one hand, his 58 years of life experience evident in the fluid motion. That's what the Taliban said too. He yanked the chain, pulling Blade off balance. They were wrong. The fight ended quickly after that, when Sheriff David Parker arrived 5 minutes later, responding to Emma's concerned call. He found 12 members of the notorious Dark Riders, zip-tied with their own bike chains, sitting in Michael's rose garden. "Jesus, Harrison," the sheriff sighed, pushing back his hat. Couldn't leave the excitement back overseas? Michael was already replanting Emma's rose seedlings with military precision. "They threatened Emma, Dave. You know I couldn't let that stand." The sheriff surveyed the scene, noting how none of the bikers were seriously injured despite their defeat. That was Michael's way, efficient but never cruel. Even in combat, he'd been known for using exactly as much force as necessary, no more. "You know this isn't over," Parker warned quietly. "The Dark Riders have chapters in 3 states. They won't take this humiliation lying down. Then they'll learn the same lesson." Michael's voice was calm as he carefully packed soil around a tender rose shoot. "Some things are worth protecting." Word of the confrontation at Harrison Farm spread through Riverside Valley like wildfire. By sunset, Sheriff Parker's phone wouldn't stop ringing with calls from concerned citizens and reporters trying to verify the rumors. 12 members of the Dark Riders, a gang that had terrorized 3 counties, taken down by a single farmer. At the county jail, Blade Mitchell nursed his bruised ego along with his injuries. His lieutenant, Marcus Hawk Reeves, listened through the cell phone as Blade spat out orders. "Get everyone together. I want that farm burned to the ground by morning." "Boss, maybe we should think this through," Hawk suggested, watching other Dark Riders gather at their warehouse hideout. Something wasn't adding up about this farmer. The way he moved, the precision of his attacks, how he'd anticipated their every move. "Are you questioning me?" Blade's voice turned dangerous. That man humiliated the Dark Riders. Nobody does that and lives to tell about it. Back at Harrison Farm, Deputy Sarah Chen took photographs of the scene while Michael cleaned up the mess from the fight. Mr. Harrison, you need to accept protection. When the rest of the Dark Riders find out about this—" "I appreciate the concern, Deputy," Michael interrupted gently, continuing to replant Emma's damaged roses with military precision. "But I can handle myself." Sarah wasn't giving up. "Sir, there are at least 30 more gang members out there. They've never let an insult go unanswered. Last month they burned down the Peterson farm just for refusing to pay protection money. Then maybe it's time someone stood up to them." Michael's voice remained calm, but Sarah noticed how his eyes constantly scanned the horizon, checking sightlines and potential approach routes. This was not the behavior of a simple farmer. Back at the station, Sarah shared her observations with Sheriff Parker. "Dave, something's off about Harrison. The way he moves, the way he took down 12 armed men. He's had serious training." Parker sighed, looking at a folder marked "Classified" on his desk. "Sarah, some things are better left alone. Just know that Michael Harrison is the least of our worries." That evening, Emma refused to leave the farm despite Michael's protests. She sat at his kitchen table, stubbornly arranging fresh-cut roses. "Those thugs threaten my flowers. Besides, someone needs to make sure you eat properly." A truck pulled up outside. Dr. Alice Martinez, the local veterinarian and Michael's late wife Grace's best friend, hurried in. "Michael, I just heard. Are you okay?" Her eyes quickly scanned him for injuries. "I'm fine, Alice. Just some garden maintenance today." Michael managed a small smile. "Garden maintenance? The whole town's talking about how you single-handedly took down half the Dark Riders." She lowered her voice. "They're saying Blade Mitchell is out for blood." "Let him come," Michael said quietly, but something in his tone made both women exchange worried glances. At the community center, Pastor Mark Roberts was dealing with the aftermath in his own way. The Dark Riders had been terrorizing his congregation for months, demanding protection money from church fundraisers. He called an emergency meeting with local business owners. "We can't let Michael face this alone," Bill Anderson argued from his wheelchair, his broken leg propped up. "The Riders will come back with everything they've got." "But what can we do?" Frank Turner from the hardware store asked. "They're killers. We're just farmers and shopkeepers." Pastor Roberts looked thoughtful. "Maybe that's been our problem all along. We've been acting alone. It's time we stood together." As night fell over Riverside Valley, the pieces were in motion. A simple act of defense had sparked a chain of events that would reshape an entire community. But first, blood would be spilled, trust would be broken, and unlikely alliances would form in the most unexpected places. The real battle for Riverside Valley was about to begin, and Michael Harrison, at 58, was about to face a challenge that would make his combat days look simple in comparison. At the Dark Riders' warehouse hideout, over 30 motorcycles lined up as Blade laid out his plan for revenge. But Marcus "Hawk" Reeves couldn't shake his unease. He'd served in Afghanistan, and something about the way Harrison had fought seemed familiar. "Check this out," Ghost said, showing Hawk his phone. He'd been digging into Harrison's background. "Guy moved here 5 years ago after his wife died, bought the farm from his uncle. But before that, nothing. It's like he didn't exist." "Shadow, we need to know more about this farmer before we move against him," Hawk warned, his military instincts screaming danger. "We know all we need to know," Blade snarled. "Tonight we show Riverside Valley what happens when you disrespect the Dark Riders." Young Tommy Thompson, Emma's grandson, watched from his hiding spot behind the warehouse. He'd followed the bikers, hoping to gather information to help Michael. His heart raced as he heard their plans, but as he turned to slip away, a twig snapped under his foot. "What was that?" Tank's voice boomed. "Check the perimeter." Tommy ran, his feet pounding on the gravel. Behind him, motorcycles roared to life. The boy knew these roads well, but the bikes were faster. Headlights illuminated his path as the gang closed in. Just when Tommy thought he was done for, a familiar pickup truck appeared from a side road. "Get in," Michael commanded. Tommy dove into the truck as Michael executed a perfect defensive driving maneuver, throwing up a cloud of dust that blinded their pursuers. "How did you know?" Tommy gasped, his heart still racing. Emma called, Said you were acting suspicious at dinner. Michael's voice was calm, but his eyes never stopped checking the mirrors. That was a brave thing you did, Tommy. Stupid, but brave. They're coming tonight, Tommy blurted out. All of them. They're going to burn down the farm. Michael nodded, unsurprised. I know. That's why I need you to help me get everyone to safety. The truck turned toward town, where lights were starting to come on as word spread of the impending confrontation. At the old church basement, Pastor Roberts had gathered the community. Michael addressed the crowd, his military bearing evident as Sheriff Parker and his deputies secured the perimeter. Everyone stays here until it's over, Michael instructed, his voice carrying the quiet authority that made people listen. Sheriff Parker and Deputy Chen will keep you safe. But it's your farm they're coming to burn, Bill Anderson protested from his wheelchair. Everything you've worked for. Buildings can be rebuilt, Michael replied. Lives can't. His eyes met Emma's determined gaze. No arguments, Emma. You too. The hell with that, Emma declared, standing up. Grace would never forgive me if I let you face this alone. Besides, I've got fresh coffee brewing in your kitchen. A ghost of a smile crossed Michael's face. The coffee can wait. That coffee isn't for you, Emma said firmly. After a good fight, even the worst people need a moment to think. Sometimes the best way to end a war is with a hot cup of coffee and a willing ear. Back at Harrison Farm, Michael worked quickly and methodically. To any observer, his preparations might have seemed strange. He wasn't boarding up windows or setting up barricades. Instead, he was strategically positioning farm equipment, adjusting irrigation systems, and setting up work lights in seemingly random patterns. Sheriff Parker pulled him aside. You sure about this? I can have state police here in an hour. An hour's too long, Michael replied, checking his watch. And this needs to end tonight, Dave. These people have lived in fear long enough. The sheriff nodded reluctantly. You know, when you moved back here, I thought you were done with all this. So did I. Michael looked up at the darkening sky. Sometimes we don't choose our battles. They choose us. At the church, Tommy couldn't sit still. We should be helping him. Emma put a hand on his shoulder. Watch and learn, child. Sometimes the quietest men are the most dangerous. Deputy Chen frowned at her radio. Sheriff, we're getting reports of explosions at the Dark Riders warehouse. That's impossible, Parker replied. All their guys are headed to Harrison's farm. Not all of them, Tommy grinned. I might have mentioned where they keep their fuel to a certain farmer. The stage was set as Michael stood alone in his darkened barn, listening to the approaching motorcycles. His hands moved automatically, checking equipment that had nothing to do with farming. The muscle memory from his Force Recon days had never left him. At 58, he was about to face odds that would make a younger man hesitate. But age had taught him that victory often comes not from strength alone, but from wisdom, patience, and knowing exactly when to strike. The real battle for Riverside Valley was about to begin, and with it would come changes that would echo through generations. The night cloaked the Dark Riders warehouse in shadows, as Blade Mitchell paced in front of his assembled force, 40 riders strong, the largest gathering of the gang in years. The fluorescent lights cast harsh shadows across his scarred face as he addressed his men. This ends tonight, Blade's voice carried over the rumbling engines. Harrison humiliated us, made us look weak. After we're done with his farm, no one will dare stand against the Dark Riders again. But Hawk noticed something odd. Their most violent members were cheering, but some of the veterans in the group looked uncomfortable. He recognized the look. He'd seen it in the mirror often enough. It was the face of men who'd seen enough violence in their lives. Ghost Tank, you take the east approach, Blade ordered, spreading a crude map across his bike's seat. Hawk's team hits from the west. I want that place surrounded. Boss, Hawk spoke up, his military instincts screaming danger. Something's not right. Harrison had hours to clear out, but my sources say he's still there. Alone. Good, Blade grinned, revealing a chipped tooth. Makes it easier. No, Hawk insisted, stepping forward. It makes it suspicious. No normal farmer stays to face 40 armed men alone. Blade's hand shot out, grabbing Hawk's collar. You questioning me again? I'm trying to keep us alive, Hawk shot back. I served Blade. The way Harrison moved, the way he set us up, he's not just some farmer. Don't care if he's goddamn Superman, Blade snarled. Tonight, he's a dead man. The bikers roared off into the darkness, splitting into their assigned groups. But Hawk held back, watching through his binoculars. Something about the farm's layout had changed. The work lights created strange shadows, and the equipment wasn't where it had been that morning. At the sheriff's station, Deputy Chen monitored the radio traffic. They're moving, Sheriff, at least 40 bikes. Parker nodded grimly. Harrison knew they'd come in force. That's why he wanted the town safe first. Sir, Chen hesitated. I pulled his service record. What was available anyway. Most of it's classified, but he wasn't just Force Recon. He ran special operations in places that don't officially exist. I know, Parker replied quietly. Let's just hope he remembers he's not fighting terrorists tonight. These are our neighbors' kids, no matter how far they've strayed. At Harrison Farm, Michael stood in his darkened barn, listening to the approaching motorcycles. His hands moved automatically through equipment checks, habits ingrained through countless missions. But tonight was different. These weren't enemy combatants he was facing, they were lost souls who needed a different kind of intervention. Emma's words echoed in his mind. Sometimes the best way to end a war is with a hot cup of coffee and a willing ear. At 58, he'd learned that not every battle needed to end in destruction. Sometimes, the greatest victory came from turning an enemy into a friend. The first wave of bikers hit the irrigation pipes he'd repositioned. Their bikes slipped in the mud. The work lights strategically placed destroyed their night vision while leaving long shadows where Michael could move unseen. Spread out! Blade's voice carried over the confusion. Find him! But Michael was already moving, a shadow among shadows. One by one, bikers found themselves disarmed and disabled by an opponent they couldn't see. Years of special operations experience merged with intimate knowledge of the farm's layout. He's picking us apart, someone shouted. Hawk, watching from the road, saw the pattern. Son of a... He's using tactical sweep formations. This guy's military, high-level military. Blade, enraged, grabbed a gas can. Burn it all. But when he tried to splash fuel on the barn, he found the can filled with water. All their fuel reserves had been destroyed in the warehouse explosion. Looking for this? Michael's voice came from the darkness. He held up a fuel cap. Never leave your supply lines unprotected. Basic tactical error. Blade spun around, firing his pistol blindly. The shot went wide, and suddenly Michael was there, disarming him with practiced ease. Blade found himself face down in the mud, his arm locked behind him. You know what your biggest mistake was? Michael asked quietly. Not the protection racket, not threatening my farm. It was threatening Emma. She makes coffee for the VA hospital every week. Some of your own men probably had it. We're not done, Blade spat dirt. The Dark Riders have chapters in 3 states. You can't fight an army alone. He's not alone, a new voice spoke up. Several bikers had removed their colors, including Hawk. Some of us remember what it means to serve something bigger than ourselves. The fight was over in less than 20 minutes. When Sheriff Parker arrived, he found 30 bikers zip-tied and sitting quietly in the barn. Some were nursing injuries, but none were seriously hurt. Another 10 had fled into the night. But it was what happened next that would truly change Riverside Valley forever. Inside the warmly lit barn, the captured riders sat in an odd silence, the fight drained from them. The smell of fresh coffee mingled with motor oil and hay as Emma moved among them, serving her signature brew. Michael moved through the group, not as a captor but as something else entirely. He checked their injuries, offered water, and most surprisingly, asked questions that revealed a deeper understanding of their struggles. The night that was meant to destroy Harrison Farm was about to become something entirely different. A beginning, rather than an end, a chance for lost warriors to find their way home. The first wave of bikers hit the irrigation pipes he'd repositioned. Their bikes slid in the mud as Michael moved through the darkness with lethal grace. His months of preparation for this moment showed in every detail, from the strategically placed lights that destroyed their night vision to the carefully orchestrated kill zones that would minimize actual killing. "He's using the terrain against us," Hawk shouted, recognizing military tactics. The farm had become a carefully crafted trap, with Michael controlling every aspect of the engagement. Equipment was positioned to funnel attackers into vulnerable positions. Irrigation had turned stable ground treacherous, and the lighting created a maze of shadows where Michael could strike unseen. Blade's rage grew as his forces fell into disarray. "Burn it all," he commanded, but his men found their fuel cans filled with water. The warehouse explosion had destroyed their reserves, leaving them without the means to carry out their destruction. "Looking for this?" Michael's voice carried from the shadows, holding up their missing fuel caps. "First rule of combat: secure your supply lines." The fight moved through the farm like a choreographed dance, with Michael systematically dismantling the Dark Riders' attack. His years of special operations experience showed in every movement, every tactic designed to disorient and demoralize rather than destroy. In the church basement, Tommy couldn't contain his excitement as reports filtered in. "He's winning! The Dark Riders are falling apart." Emma sat calmly knitting, her confidence in Michael unwavering. "Of course he is, dear. There's a difference between being tough and being right." Michael's both. Sheriff Parker monitored the situation from his patrol car, ready to intervene if things got out of hand. But he knew Michael well enough to trust his judgment. This wasn't just about stopping the Dark Riders. It was about saving them from themselves. Back at the farm, Michael had systematically separated the veteran riders from the rest. He recognized them by their movements, their tactical awareness, the way they hesitated before following orders that went against their military training. "You served?" he asked Hawk after disarming him, noting the man's combat-trained reactions. "Afghanistan, 3rd Rangers," Hawk admitted. "How did you—" "The way you move. Once a soldier, always a soldier." Michael's voice carried understanding rather than judgment. "How'd you end up riding with them?" "Came home. Nothing made sense anymore. The riders, they offered brotherhood." "Brotherhood built on fear isn't brotherhood at all," Michael replied, helping him up. "Real brotherhood lifts people up, doesn't tear them down." The night wore on, and one by one, the Dark Riders found themselves outmaneuvered and subdued. But it was what happened after the fighting that would truly change everything. In the warm light of the barn, Michael had gathered the captured riders. The smell of Emma's coffee filled the air as she moved among them, offering warmth and surprisingly gentle words to men who'd come to destroy her friend's farm. "You know," she said, pouring coffee for a young rider nursing a sprained wrist, "my late husband was a Vietnam vet. He used to say the hardest part of war isn't the fighting. It's finding your way home afterward." Michael watched as her words sank in. He saw the shame in some faces, recognition in others. These weren't hardened criminals. They were lost souls who'd found the wrong kind of family. "What happens now?" Ghost asked, his tough exterior cracking. "You turning us in?" "That depends," Michael replied, "on whether you want to keep following a path that leads nowhere, or if you're ready to find a better way." Blade, still secured but now sitting on a hay bale, spat on the ground. "You're soft, Harrison. Think you can change us with coffee and kind words?" "No," Michael's voice was firm. "Change has to come from within, but sometimes people just need to be shown another path." Sheriff Parker arrived to find an unusual scene. Instead of arrests and anger, he found conversations happening. Veterans among the riders were opening up about their struggles to readjust to civilian life. Younger members listened as Michael and Hawk discussed the true meaning of brotherhood. "Dave," Michael called the sheriff over, "I think we might have a solution that doesn't involve filling up your jail." Parker surveyed the scene skeptically. "These men came to burn down your farm, Michael. And now they have a chance to help rebuild it." Michael gestured to the veterans among the group. "These men aren't criminals at heart. They're warriors who lost their way, found the wrong kind of brotherhood." As dawn approached, something extraordinary was taking shape in that barn. The Dark Riders' attempted assault had transformed into an unexpected opportunity for redemption. Michael laid out his proposal. Those who want to change, who want to find a better path, I'm offering you a chance. The farm needs help, and more importantly, I know other vets who need help, people who understand what you've been through. You're crazy, Blade sneered from his restraints. If you think, shut up, Blade, Hawk cut him off. For once in your life, just shut up. He turned to Michael. What exactly are you offering? A program, part work, part therapy. The VA's been wanting me to start one anyway. Michael looked around the barn. You help rebuild what you tried to destroy tonight, learn some farming skills, get some counseling, and maybe find a better way to use your brotherhood. Deputy Chen spoke up from where she'd been quietly observing. Sheriff, we could make it part of a rehabilitation program, alternative sentencing. Those who complete it get clean records. The sheriff nodded thoughtfully. And those who don't? I'm in, said a young rider immediately. Others began nodding, seeing a chance they never expected. As the sun rose over Harrison Farm, plans began taking shape. Sheriff Parker made calls to the DA's office. Dr. Martinez offered to coordinate with VA counselors. Emma simply kept pouring coffee and serving her muffins as if this was the most natural thing in the world. The night that was meant to destroy Harrison Farm had instead become the beginning of something extraordinary. A new kind of brotherhood was taking root, nourished by Emma's coffee and Michael's quiet understanding. Nobody could have predicted how this strange night would transform not just their lives, but the entire community of Riverside Valley. The war that everyone expected had instead become something far more powerful, a chance for redemption. And it all started because one former Marine believed that even the hardest hearts could change when given the right soil in which to grow. 1 week after the confrontation at Harrison Farm, the morning quiet was broken by the rumble of motorcycles. But this time, they came not to destroy, but to rebuild. Hawk led a group of 20 former dark riders up the gravel drive, their bikes gleaming in the early sun. Still can't believe we're doing this, muttered Tank, looking uncomfortable without his usual leather vest. Better than jail, Ghost reminded him, eyeing the burned remains of their old warehouse. Besides, after what happened to Blade, they'd all heard how their former leader and his loyal followers had tried to ambush Michael at the local diner 2 days after the barn incident. The fight lasted exactly 30 seconds. Blade ended up with a broken jaw and a 5-year sentence while Michael calmly finished his coffee. Michael stood waiting by the barn, his posture relaxed but alert. At 58, he carried himself with the same quiet confidence that had earned him respect in the Force Recon. Glad you made it. Hope you all had breakfast. Emma sent us with these. Hawk held up a basket. Said something about growing boys needing proper food. Of course she did. Michael smiled slightly. First thing we need to do is clear the damaged fields. Those bikes of yours tore up quite a bit of soil. The work was hard, but none of the men complained. They'd expected harsh treatment, militant discipline. Instead, they found something unexpected: respect. Michael worked alongside them, teaching rather than commanding. See these rose bushes? Michael demonstrated proper replanting techniques. The roots tell you everything. Just like in combat, you need to read the signs, understand what's beneath the surface. By mid-morning, Dr. Martinez arrived to set up the first counseling session in the converted barn office. Who's first? She asked, clipboard ready. The men exchanged nervous glances until Hawk stepped forward. Guess that's me. Lead by example, right? As Hawk disappeared into the office, Deputy Chen pulled up in her patrol car. She'd been assigned as liaison for the rehabilitation program. How's it going? Better than expected, Michael replied, watching Tank carefully showing Tommy how to check soil pH levels. They're warriors at heart, just needed a new mission. The local news crew showed up around noon, drawn by the unusual sight of former gang members working a farm. Michael kept them at a distance but allowed a few photos. These men deserve privacy while they rebuild their lives, he told the reporters firmly. Pastor Roberts arrived with lunch courtesy of his congregation. Church council voted unanimously to support the program, he announced. We're converting the old youth center into a dormitory for veterans who need housing. The transformation wasn't just physical. As the men worked the land, stories began to emerge. Ghost had been a combat medic before PTSD drove him to the gang. Tank lost his family to divorce after 3 tours left him unable to readjust to civilian life. Each had sought brotherhood in the Dark Riders, finding temporary relief in violence and intimidation. "It's strange," Hawk commented during a water break. "In the gang, we thought we were free, but we were just building another prison." That afternoon, Bill Anderson arrived from his feed store, his leg still in a cast. Everyone tensed, remembering they were the ones who'd broken it, but Bill just wheeled himself up to Tank. "Here you used to be a mechanic," he said gruffly. "My delivery truck's been making a noise. Want to take a look?" More community members began stopping by. Maria Gonzalez, whose farm had once been targeted by the Dark Riders, brought homemade tamales. "My father always said hungry men can't think straight," she declared, setting up an impromptu feast in the barn. The former bikers were bewildered by the acceptance. They'd expected hatred, fear, not homemade food and job offers. "Why are they doing this?" Ghost asked Michael quietly. "Because that's what community means," Michael replied. "When I came back from my last tour, this town helped me heal. Now it's your turn." As evening approached, Emma arrived with more food, accompanied by Helen Parker, the sheriff's wife. "Ladies Auxiliary wants to help," Helen announced. "We're organizing a fundraiser for the veteran housing program." "Never thought I'd see the day," Sheriff Parker commented, watching his wife chat with former gang members about her famous peach cobbler. "You sure about all this?" he asked Michael. "They're not exactly model citizens." "They're not bad men, Dave," Michael replied, remembering his own struggles after leaving the Marines. "Just lost their way. Sometimes the hardest part of war is coming home." The sheriff nodded thoughtfully. "Blade's trial starts next week. His hardcore followers are looking at serious time, but the DA's agreed to alternative sentencing for anyone who completes your program." As the sun set, the men prepared to leave. They'd accomplished more in one day than any of them expected. The damaged fields were cleared, new seedlings planted, and the first counseling sessions completed. "Same time tomorrow?" Hawk asked, wiping sweat from his face. "Be here at dawn," Michael confirmed. "And Hawk, tell the others, the ones still on the fence. Doors open if they want help." That night, after everyone had gone, Michael sat on his porch with Emma, sharing coffee. "Grace would be so proud," Emma said softly. "This was her dream too, wasn't it? Making the farm a place of healing?" Michael nodded, looking out over the fields where former enemies had spent the day learning to create rather than destroy. She always said everyone deserves a second chance. As Emma drove away, Michael checked his phone. 5 more former Dark Riders had texted asking to join the program, and Bill Anderson had sent a message about hiring 2 of them at his feed store. The seeds of change had been planted. Now they just needed time to grow. 2 weeks into the rehabilitation program, trouble arrived in the form of 30 motorcycles roaring into Riverside Valley. The Night Wolves, a rival gang from the next state, had caught wind of the Dark Riders' apparent weakness. Michael was teaching a group of veterans about irrigation systems when Hawk rode up fast to the farm. "We've got problems, big ones," Hawk reported, dismounting quickly. "Night Wolves are at Bill's feed store right now, threatening Tank and Ghost. Word got out about our change in management." At Bill Anderson's feed store, Tank and Ghost were facing down the Night Wolves' leader, a mountain of a man known as Crusher. Both former Dark Riders had been working legitimate jobs there for a week. "Look at you two," Crusher sneered, knocking over a display of feed bags. "Playing shop clerk, drawing honest paychecks. Dark Riders turned into dark puppies." "Leave it alone, Crusher," Tank warned. "We're done with that life. Nobody's done until we say they're done." Crusher knocked over a tool cart. "Blade might be in jail, but you still owe us protection payments from his deals." Bill Anderson wheeled himself out of his office, his healing leg still in a brace. "This is my property. Get out before I call the sheriff." Crusher laughed. "Call whoever you want, old man. By the time they get here—" "They're already here," came Michael's quiet voice from behind them. The Night Wolves turned to find Michael standing there, accompanied by Sheriff Parker and Deputy Chen. Behind them, trucks and cars were pulling up, carrying more former Dark Riders and townspeople. "This isn't your business, farmer," Crusher growled. "Actually, it is. Michael stepped forward. These men work for Bill. Bill's a friend. That makes it my business. Crusher looked around at his gang. 30 of us. One of you. I like those odds. You might want to check your math, Sheriff Parker commented as more vehicles arrived. Former Dark Riders who'd joined the rehabilitation program were pulling up alongside dozens of townspeople. Even Emma was there, armed with her wooden spoon. This is what you left the Dark Riders for? Crusher taunted Tank and Ghost. Playing farmer with some local hero? No, Tank replied, standing straight. We left because we found something better than fear. We found purpose and community. Ghost stepped forward, moving to stand beside Michael. Crusher's face darkened. You're dead, all of you. He reached inside his jacket. What happened next became another Riverside Valley legend. Before Crusher could draw his weapon, Michael moved with the liquid speed that had made him legendary in Force Recon. The giant biker found himself disarmed and face down on the concrete. Now, Michael said conversationally, maintaining his hold on Crusher, we're going to have a civilized discussion about territory and respect. The Night Wolves reached for weapons but froze as Sheriff Parker's deputies emerged from strategic positions, weapons ready. More importantly, they found themselves surrounded by determined townspeople and reformed bikers standing shoulder to shoulder. See, here's the thing, Michael continued, his voice carrying to everyone. Riverside Valley isn't just some territory to be carved up. These people aren't marks for your protection racket. They're my friends, my family, our family. Our family, Hawk corrected, stepping forward. The other former Dark Riders nodded. So you have two choices, Michael went on. Leave now and spread the word that Riverside Valley is off limits, or, he applied slightly more pressure, making Crusher gasp. We can continue this discussion at the sheriff's station. Your call. For a tense moment, no one moved. Then one of the Night Wolves gunned his bike and took off. Others followed quickly. Within minutes, only Crusher remained. Okay, Crusher wheezed. We're gone. Riverside Valley's yours. No, Michael corrected, helping him up but maintaining a firm grip. Riverside Valley belongs to its people. Remember that. As the Night Wolves retreated, Bill Anderson approached Tank and Ghost. Well, boys, that was an exciting lunch break. Now about that inventory you were cataloging. The casual return to normalcy broke the tension. People began dispersing, though many headed to Emma's house. She'd announced an impromptu celebration dinner. That evening, the farm's barn was packed. Former enemies sat together sharing Emma's cooking while Dr. Martinez led a group therapy session. The Night Wolves' appearance had shaken some of the veterans, bringing up old traumas. I almost went for a weapon, Ghost admitted during the session. It was pure instinct. But you didn't, Michael reminded him. You chose a different path. That's what matters. Sheriff Parker, enjoying Emma's pie, pulled Michael aside. Word spreading about your program. Got calls from 3 other countries asking how to set up something similar. Michael watched as Tank taught Tommy about engine maintenance while Emma supervised. Hawk was discussing plans for a veteran-run security company with Bill Anderson. Pastor Roberts was organizing a community garden project with Maria Gonzalez. The transformation that had begun with a single confrontation was spreading, proving that sometimes the greatest victories come not from defeating an enemy, but from helping them find their way home. The morning fog still clung to Harrison Farm as Michael made his rounds, checking on the progress of his unusual crew. 1 month into the rehabilitation program, the transformation was evident not just in the flourishing fields, but in the men themselves. The former Dark Riders carried themselves differently now, purpose replacing the aggressive swagger that had once defined them. Morning, Chief, Ghost called out, using the respectful nickname the veterans had given Michael. He was carefully tending to the herb garden, his combat medic's hands now healing plants instead of wounds. The lavender's coming in strong. Good work, Michael replied, noting how Ghost's hands no longer shook like they used to. The PTSD episodes that had once driven him to seek relief in violence were becoming less frequent. Dr. Martinez wants to expand the therapeutic garden program. Says working with herbs helps veterans process trauma. Hawk approached, his face serious. Michael, we need to talk. Got word from my contacts in state prison. Blade's been making calls. Remember Snake Eyes and his crew from the Western chapter? Michael nodded. Snake Eyes led the most violent faction of the Dark Riders, notorious even among outlaw bikers. They're coming? 3 days, maybe 4. Blade convinced them we're traitors, told them we're giving up Dark Rider territory and secrets. Hawk's voice tightened. They're not like the Night Wolves, Michael. Snake Eyes. He doesn't leave survivors. Inside the barn office, Michael called an emergency meeting. Sheriff Parker, Deputy Chen, and the program's core group gathered around the worn planning table. The same table where, weeks ago, these men had plotted to destroy his farm. Now they were planning to defend it. Snake Eyes has 50 hardcore riders, Tank reported. Ex-cons, muscle for hire, drug runners. They make Blade look like a Boy Scout. We've got 28 in the program now, Hawk added, all making good progress, but asking them to fight. Michael's voice was firm. We don't ask anyone to fight. This is a voluntary program. Everyone makes their own choice. Choice is what separates us from them, Ghost agreed. That's what you've been teaching us. Dr. Martinez spoke up from where she'd been taking notes. Fighting could trigger severe setbacks in their recovery. Many are just starting to process their combat trauma. We're not going back to violence, Michael said quietly. The room fell silent, all eyes on him. At 58, he'd seen enough fighting to last several lifetimes. There's another way. He laid out his plan. It wasn't a battle strategy, but something far more powerful. Sheriff Parker nodded slowly as he understood. It's risky, Michael, but it might be crazy enough to work. The next 3 days were a flurry of activity. The rehabilitation program continued, but with new purpose. Former Dark Riders worked alongside townspeople, preparing not for war, but for something far more challenging. Peace. On the 4th morning, the rumble of motorcycles echoed through the valley. Snake Eyes led his column of riders down the main road, expecting to find a farm fortified for battle. Instead, they found open gates and welcome signs. The parking area had been expanded to accommodate their bikes. The smell of Emma's cooking wafted from the barn, where tables had been set up displaying photos and progress reports from the rehabilitation program. Veterans Affairs representatives stood ready with information about benefits and services. Job recruiters from local businesses had set up booths. Most surprisingly, there was a medical station where Ghost, now certified in civilian first aid, offered free health checks. You boys rode a long way, he said calmly to his former associates. Let's check your blood pressure. Snake Eyes, a giant of a man with a serpentine tattoo covering half his face, found himself face to face not with armed resistance but with Michael calmly pouring coffee. Heard you were coming, Michael said, offering a cup. Thought you might want to see what your brothers have been up to. They're not brothers, Snake Eyes growled. They're traitors. Really? Michael gestured to where Tank was teaching a motorcycle maintenance class to local youth. Hawk was discussing security contracts with business owners. Former Dark Riders worked alongside townspeople, their old colors replaced with work shirts bearing the program's logo, a rising sun over crossed wheat stalks. Look around, Michael continued. These men aren't prisoners. They're not betraying anything. They're building something. Just like you built the Dark Riders to give veterans a home after war. Remember that's how it started? Snake Eyes' hand tightened on his coffee cup. You don't know nothing about us. 3 tours in Iraq, Michael replied. 2 Purple Hearts. Honorable discharge after an IED took your right eye. That's why they call you Snake Eyes. The glass eye with the snake design. Custom made in Germany. The big man stiffened. How did you? Because that's what this program does. We learn each other's stories. We understand. These men haven't betrayed the Dark Riders. They've returned to what the Riders were meant to be. A brotherhood helping veterans find their way home. Throughout the day, Snake Eyes' men found themselves drawn into conversations. They saw their former brothers not as traitors, but as men who'd found a different path. Some visited the VA representatives, learning about benefits they'd never known they qualified for. Others talked with job recruiters, surprised to find their military skills were in demand. By sunset, something extraordinary had happened. Snake Eyes stood in the barn, looking at a photo wall showing the program's progress. "We lost our way," he said quietly. "Somewhere between helping vets and becoming outlaws, we forgot what brotherhood meant." Michael handed him a program application. It's never too late to remember. 3 days later, 15 of Snake Eyes' riders returned, not to fight, but to apply for the program. Snake Eyes himself went back to lead the Western Chapter's transformation, carrying the seeds of change to other Dark Rider territories. The hidden wounds that had driven these men to violence were finally beginning to heal, proving that sometimes the strongest choice isn't to fight, but to offer understanding to those who come as enemies. That evening, as Michael sat on his porch with Emma, she smiled knowingly. "You planned this all along, didn't you? From that first night when they came to burn down your farm." Michael watched the sunset paint the sky over his fields, where former enemies now work together to grow something new. Sometimes the best way to win a war is to show your enemy a better path to peace. 6 weeks into the rehabilitation program, Harrison Farm had transformed beyond recognition. The old barn now housed a state-of-the-art training center, where former Dark Riders taught motorcycle maintenance to local youth. The fields flourished under careful tending, and a new dormitory housed veterans working through the program. Michael stood in the early morning light, watching Ghost lead a group therapy session in the therapeutic garden. The former combat medic had found his calling helping others heal. "Your demons don't define you," Ghost told the group. "What defines you is how you choose to rise above them." The rumble of approaching motorcycles drew Michael's attention. Hawk pulled up, his face grim. "Got trouble, Chief. Remember those protection payments Blade was collecting?" Turns out he wasn't working alone. The Crimson Kings are here to collect. The Crimson Kings were more than just a motorcycle gang. They were an organized crime syndicate with connections in 3 states. Their arrival meant the stakes had just gotten higher. "How many?" Michael asked, already calculating. 60 bikes spotted heading this way. These aren't weekend warriors, Michael. These are professional criminals." Sheriff Parker arrived minutes later. "My deputies are evacuating the vulnerable areas of town. But Michael, these guys, they've got lawyers, politicians in their pocket. We can't handle this the same way we did the Night Wolves." "No," Michael agreed. "This time we need the community." Within an hour, the farm became command central. Bill Anderson coordinated with local business owners. Pastor Roberts mobilized church networks. Emma and the Ladies' Auxiliary organized support systems. Former Dark Riders worked alongside townspeople, preparing for what was coming. The Crimson Kings made their entrance with calculated precision. Their leader, Marcus the Banker Richardson, wore an expensive suit beneath his leather cut. He looked more Wall Street than outlaw biker. "Mr. Harrison," the banker called out, his voice cultured and cold. "Let's discuss business like civilized men. Blade's operation owed us considerable sums. Those debts transferred to you when you acquired his territory." Michael stood on his porch, calm and unmoved. "This isn't about territory or debts, this is about community." "Community?" The banker laughed. "Look around you. You've got reformed criminals working your fields, living off charity. How long before they return to their true nature?" "Their true nature?" Ghost stepped forward. "Let me tell you about true nature. I was a combat medic, saved lives. Then PTSD made me think violence was the only answer. Michael and this program showed me my true nature wasn't lost, just buried." Tank joined him. "I lost my family because I couldn't adjust to civilian life. Now I'm teaching kids motorcycle repair, rebuilding relationships with my children." One by one, program members stepped forward, sharing their stories. The Crimson Kings shifted uncomfortably, hearing echoes of their own struggles. "Very touching," the banker sneered. "But sentiment doesn't pay debts." "No," Michael agreed. "But this might interest you." He nodded to Sheriff Parker, who handed the banker a thick folder. "What's this?" "Evidence," Michael replied. "Financial records, criminal enterprises, political bribes, everything Blade kept as insurance. Enough to bring down your entire organization." The banker's composure cracked. "You're bluffing." "Try me. Orient." Michael gestured to the gathered community. You could consider a different kind of investment. What are you proposing? Partnership, legitimate partnership. Your business expertise, our rehabilitation program. We're expanding, helping veterans across 3 states. We need funding. You need legitimacy. Transform your organization from the inside, just like we did with the Dark Riders. The banker studied Michael carefully. You're suggesting we go straight, just like that? Nothing just like that about it. It's hard work, but look around, it works. Your choice. Risk everything fighting us or help build something that lasts. For a long moment, the banker was silent. Then, surprisingly, he laughed. 20 years in this business, never seen anything like this. A farmer offering redemption to an entire criminal enterprise. Not just a farmer, Hawk corrected. A warrior who never forgot what we're really fighting for. The negotiations lasted hours. By sunset, an extraordinary partnership had formed. The Crimson Kings would legitimize, using their resources to expand the rehabilitation program nationwide. Their business acumen would ensure sustainability, while Michael's methods would guide the transformation. That evening, as the community celebrated at the farm, Emma found Michael on his porch. You knew, didn't you? When you started this, you knew it would grow beyond just our town. Michael watched former enemies working together, planning a future none of them could have imagined weeks ago. Grace always said change is like farming. Plant the right seeds, tend them with care, and trust in the harvest. The sun set on a community that had risen above fear, proving that the strongest defense against darkness is people standing together in the light. 2 months into the program's success, Michael awoke to an urgent call from Sheriff Parker. Got a situation. Wire Rider's crew just hit 3 rehabilitation centers in the next state, burned them to the ground. Wire Rider was legendary in the biker world, a shadow figure who controlled drug routes across 5 states. The attack on rehabilitation centers was a clear message. Redemption would not be tolerated. Michael gathered his core team in the barn. Hawk's face was grim as he shared intelligence. Wire Riders gathered over 200 bikes, former military contractors, mercenaries. They're not coming to negotiate. They're coming to erase us. This isn't about territory anymore, Ghost added. Our success threatens their entire operation. Every rider we reform weakens their hold. Michael stood at the planning table, his military training kicking in. How long? 3 days, Max. They're moving cautiously, destroying every rehabilitation center in their path. The news spread through Riverside Valley like wildfire, but instead of panic, something remarkable happened. The community mobilized. Bill Anderson coordinated with trucking companies to create roadblocks. Maria Gonzalez's farming network established supply lines. Pastor Roberts's churches became safe houses. Emma organized the town's elderly residents. We've lived through wars and storms, she declared. We're not running from thugs. Michael's farm transformed into a command center. The former Dark Riders, now officially renamed the Valley Guardians, put their military experience to use. Tank designed defensive positions. Ghost set up medical stations. Hawk coordinated with law enforcement across 3 counties. The banker arrived with unexpected support. The Crimson Kings stand with you, he announced, bringing resources and intelligence. Wire Rider's been a plague on legitimate businesses for too long. But the real surprise came when Snake Eyes roared up with 50 reformed riders from the western chapters. Brotherhood means standing together, he said simply. Michael's plan wasn't just about defense. He understood that Wire Rider's power came from shadows and fear. The solution wasn't to fight. It was to bring everything into the light. Wire Rider's operation depends on corruption and silence, Michael explained. So we give him nowhere to hide. They activated networks across 3 states. Reformed riders provided evidence of criminal operations. The banker's connections in legitimate business exposed money laundering schemes. Law enforcement coordinated across jurisdictions. When Wire Rider's army arrived at Riverside Valley, they found not a simple farm, but a community united. Roadblocks manned by truckers and farmers. Media cameras everywhere thanks to Emma's connection with local news. Reformed riders standing alongside law enforcement. Wire Rider himself, a lean figure in black leather, approached the farm alone. His reputation for violence preceded him, but Michael saw something familiar in his eyes, the look of a soldier who'd fought too long. "Impressive setup," Wire Rider observed. "But it won't save you. You're disrupting the natural order." "The natural order?" Michael stepped forward. "Look around. This is the natural order. People standing together, helping each other heal. The chaos you create, that's the disruption." "Pretty words won't stop bullets." "No," Michael agreed, "but daylight stops shadows." He nodded to Deputy Chen, who activated the screens they'd set up. Evidence of Wire Rider's operation played for all to see, including the FBI surveillance teams hidden among the crowd. "You've got two choices," Michael continued. "Fight and lose everything, or join us and help build something better. Your skills, your leadership, imagine using them to heal instead of harm." Wire Rider's hand tightened on his bike's handlebar. "You think redemption is that simple?" "Nothing simple about it. But look at these men." Michael gestured to the Valley Guardians. "Former enemies working together, veterans finding peace, community growing stronger. Tell me that's not worth fighting for." For a long moment, Wire Rider was silent. Then, surprisingly, he laughed. 20 years running from the light, maybe it's time to step into it. The transformation of Wire Rider's organization would become legend. His network of safe houses became rehabilitation centers. Drug routes transformed into supply lines for veteran support programs. His riders, many former military themselves, found purpose in protection instead of intimidation. But more importantly, Riverside Valley's example spread. Communities across the country learned that the strongest defense against darkness wasn't bigger walls or more weapons. It was people standing together, helping each other heal. That evening, as the sun set on a peaceful valley, Emma found Michael on his porch. "You know what today proved? Sometimes the biggest battles are won without a single shot fired." Michael watched former enemies sharing meals, planning futures together. Grace always said the hardest fights are the ones that end in healing instead of harm. The light was winning in Riverside Valley, proving that even the deepest shadows can't stand against a community rising together in hope. 3 months into the program's success, a new challenge emerged that would test the reformed riders' commitment to their transformation. Early one morning, Hawk rushed into Michael's office, his face tense with concern. "Wire Rider's son is making moves," he reported. "Jake the Snake. Wilson's gathering the holdouts from every gang we've reformed. He's offering triple what they made in their criminal days to return to the old ways." Michael examined the intelligence reports spread across his desk. At 58, he'd seen enough conflicts to know this wasn't just about money. It was about identity. "How many have turned?" "That's the thing," Hawk replied. "None of our core group. But Jake's targeting the newer members, the ones still struggling with the transition. He's hit 3 rehabilitation centers already, promising quick cash and the old rush of outlaw life." The Valley Guardians called an emergency meeting in the barn. Ghost, now head of their counseling program, shared his concerns. "Some of our newer members are vulnerable. The pull of the old life is strong, especially when times get tough." Tank nodded grimly. "Jake's smart. He's not using threats. He's using temptation. Showing up in expensive cars, flashing cash, talking about the good old days when we answered to no one." Michael listened carefully, noting the determination in his reformed riders' faces. They'd built something real here, something worth protecting. But this threat was different. It came from within. "We can't fight this with force," Michael said finally. "This is a battle for hearts and minds." The strategy they developed was multifaceted. First, they increased support for vulnerable members. The banker, true to his reformation, established a legitimate business loan program. Local companies, led by Bill Anderson, created more job opportunities. But the real innovation came from the riders themselves. They started a mentorship program, pairing struggling members with those who'd found solid footing in their new lives. Ghost organized additional therapy sessions, focusing on the psychological pull of the old lifestyle. Jake made his first move at midnight, rolling into town with 20 bikes and a flashy convoy of sports cars. He set up at the local bar, throwing around money and promises of easy wealth. Instead of confrontation, Michael implemented what he called Operation Light. The Valley Guardians organized a community showcase. Reformed riders demonstrated their new businesses, shared stories of reconciliation with families, showed off homes they'd purchased legitimately. "Sure, Jake can offer quick cash," Tank told a group of wavering members, "but can he offer you back your self-respect, your family's trust, the pride of building something real?" Emma, ever the heart of the community, organized a family day. Children of reformed riders played alongside town kids, while proud parents watched from the sidelines. The message was clear: this new life offered something money couldn't buy. Jake's frustration grew as his recruitment efforts failed. He tried different tactics, spreading rumors about the program's future, suggesting that Michael was profiting from their labor. The test came when Jake approached Tommy, now working as an apprentice mechanic under Tank. He offered the teenager a scholarship, clearly drug money meant to compromise the program's integrity. Tommy's response became legend in Riverside Valley. He stood in the town square, faced Jake and his flashy entourage, and spoke from the heart. "3 months ago, I was scared of these men," Tommy declared, gesturing to the Valley Guardians. "Now they're teaching me to fix engines, helping me with math, showing me what real strength looks like. Your money can't buy that kind of brotherhood." The community rallied around Tommy's stand. Store owners barred Jake's crew from their businesses. The local bank, following the banker's lead, flagged suspicious transactions. Law enforcement, coordinated by Sheriff Parker, maintained a visible presence. But the real victory came from within. When Jake made his final push, offering to double his already extravagant bribes, not a single Valley Guardian accepted. The transformation was complete. They weren't just reformed outlaws anymore. They were pillars of their community. Michael found Jake at dawn sitting alone in the diner. The young man looked lost, nothing like the confident criminal who'd rolled into town weeks earlier. "Your father chose the light," Michael said quietly, sliding into the booth. "It's not too late for you to do the same." Jake stared into his coffee. "They were supposed to be hungry for the old life, eager to return to power. What did you do to them?" "Gave them something worth more than power," Michael replied. "Gave them back their honor." The test of loyalty had revealed something profound. True change, once it takes root in the heart, can't be bought or corrupted. The Valley Guardians had proven that their transformation wasn't just about leaving their old lives behind. It was about building new lives worth protecting. That evening, as the community celebrated another victory, Emma found Michael on his porch. "You know what made the difference?" she asked. "They weren't fighting against something this time, they were fighting for something." Michael watched Tommy working on a motorcycle, surrounded by reformed riders who'd become his mentors. The sight confirmed what he'd always believed, that the strongest bonds are forged not in violence, but in the shared pursuit of redemption. 4 months into the rehabilitation program, Riverside Valley faced its greatest test. Word came that multiple criminal organizations were banding together to destroy what they saw as a threat to their power. Michael received the intelligence at dawn from his expanding network of reformed riders. "They're calling it the Dark Alliance," Hawk reported. "Every major outlaw group from 5 states. Conservative estimate puts their numbers at over 500. They're not coming to negotiate. They're coming to erase us and everything we've built." Michael gathered his leadership team in the command center they'd established in the converted barn. The Valley Guardians had grown to over 200 reformed members, with another 100 in various stages of rehabilitation. "This is different from our previous challenges," Michael explained, his combat experience evident in his tactical assessment. "They've learned from others' failures. They'll hit us from multiple directions, try to overwhelm our defenses through sheer numbers." The banker, now fully committed to legitimate operations, reviewed their resources. "We've got support from law enforcement in 3 states, but they can't move openly without evidence of criminal intent." "Then we give them evidence," Ghost suggested, his medical training giving way to tactical thinking. "Set up surveillance, document everything." Michael shook his head. "By then it could be too late. We need to take the initiative." The plan they developed was classic force recon strategy: disrupt the enemy before they could mass their forces. The Valley Guardians deployed teams across 5 states, using their knowledge of outlaw networks to expose criminal operations, seize drug shipments, and freeze illegal assets. Wire Rider, now one of their strongest allies, activated his reformed chapters. "Hit their supply lines," he ordered. "No drugs, no guns, no illegal cash flow. Starve the beast before it can gather strength." The Crimson Kings, under the bankers' leadership, launched financial warfare. "Every legitimate business that ever laundered their money just closed ranks," he reported with satisfaction. "Amazing what people will do when offered a chance at redemption instead of prosecution." But Michael knew the real battle would come to Riverside Valley. The Dark Alliance would want to destroy the symbol of reformation, the proof that change was possible. "We're not just defending a farm or a program anymore," he told the assembled Valley Guardians. "We're defending hope itself." The Valley transformed. Every skill learned in rehabilitation found new purpose. Tanks' mechanics fortified vehicles. Ghosts' medical teams prepared field hospitals. Former enemies worked together, their shared redemption stronger than old hatreds. Bill Anderson coordinated with trucking companies to create mobile barricades. Maria Gonzalez's farming network established supply caches. Pastor Roberts converted churches into communication hubs. Emma, ever practical, organized the community's response. "War's not won by fighters alone," she declared. "It's won by people standing together." The Dark Alliance struck at midnight, a massive force of bikes and vehicles converging on Riverside Valley. But instead of finding a single target, they faced a community transformed into a fortress. Each road into the valley became a choke point. Reformed riders used their knowledge of outlaw tactics to anticipate and counter every move. Law enforcement, coordinated by Sheriff Parker, maintained strategic positions. Michael directed the defense from his farm, now the heart of their operation. Years of special operations experience guided his decisions, but it was his understanding of redemption that proved most valuable. "Remember," his voice carried over their communication network, "we're not fighting to destroy. We're fighting to show them a better way." The battle raged for hours. The Dark Alliance found every criminal tactic countered by men who'd once employed them. Every attempt to divide the community met unified resistance. The turning point came when a group of attackers, led by a notorious enforcer, broke through to the rehabilitation center. They found not cowering victims but proud men and women defending their new lives. "I know you," Ghost told the enforcer, standing his ground. "You were a combat medic in Iraq. Remember when you saved lives instead of taking them? That man's still in there. We can help you find him again." One by one, groups of attackers faced similar moments. Former brothers in arms reconnected. Old bonds of military service superseded criminal allegiances. The Dark Alliance began to fracture as more riders chose redemption over destruction. By dawn, the valley stood undefeated. The Dark Alliance collapsed, its members either fleeing or surrendering. Many asked to join the rehabilitation program, having witnessed the strength of reformed brotherhood. Michael stood on his porch, watching the sunrise over his transformed community. "Grace always said the hardest battle is changing hearts," he told Emma. "Everything else is just preparation." Riverside Valley had proven that redemption, once ignited, could overcome any darkness. The Valley Guardians had defended not just their home, but the very possibility of change itself. 6 months after that first confrontation, Harrison Farm had transformed beyond recognition. The rehabilitation program had spread across 5 states, with over 1,000 reformed riders finding new purpose. But it was the changes in individual lives that truly measured their success. Tank stood proudly beside his son at the high school graduation ceremony. 3 months ago, they'd reunited after 5 years of separation. Now they were opening a legitimate motorcycle shop together. "Never thought I'd see this day," Tank admitted to Michael. "From breaking legs for protection money to breaking ground on a family business." Ghost had transformed the medical program into a full-scale veteran support network. Former combat medics, once lost to PTSD and violence, now staffed mobile clinics serving rural communities. "We're healing more than bodies," Ghost explained to a group of visiting VA officials. "We're healing souls." The banker, fully embracing his reformation, had established a foundation providing business loans to reformed riders. Investment in redemption, he called it, pays better dividends than any criminal enterprise. Wire Riders Network, once used for drug distribution, now coordinated emergency response teams. When tornadoes hit 3 counties over, Valley Guardians were first on scene, their military training and local knowledge proving invaluable. But it was Hawk's transformation that perhaps best symbolized their success. The former Dark Rider lieutenant now headed their training program, teaching new members the delicate balance between strength and compassion. "Remember," he told each group, "we're not just leaving something behind, we're building something new." Michael watched these changes from his porch, remembering Grace's words about growth and healing. At 58, he'd seen enough of both war and peace to know which yielded better harvests. The morning calm was broken by approaching motorcycles. But now, instead of tension, the sound brought smiles. Snake Eyes led a convoy of trucks and bikes carrying supplies for their newest rehabilitation center. "Got 30 more veterans wanting to join the program," Snake Eyes reported. "Word's spreading. They're calling us the new brotherhood on the streets." Emma arrived with her signature basket, now accompanied by a team of community volunteers. What started as coffee and muffins had grown into a full support network, providing meals and care for riders transitioning to their new lives. "The governor called again," Sheriff Parker mentioned, joining them. "Wants to make our program the state standard for rehabilitation." "As long as they understand it's not about rules and regulations," Michael replied. "It's about giving people back their honor." The evidence of their success was everywhere. Former enemies worked together in the fields, their old rivalries transformed into friendly competition over who could grow the best crops. Veterans who'd once found brotherhood in violence now found it in service. Bill Anderson's feed store had become a hub for their mechanics program, with Tank leading classes for local youth. "Never too early to learn honest work," he'd say, his own redemption story inspiring others. Pastor Roberts had expanded his outreach, coordinating with churches across 3 states to support rehabilitation centers. "Redemption isn't just spiritual," he explained. "It's practical, daily choices to be better than you were yesterday." The Dark Alliance's defeat had proven their strength, but it was their response to victory that proved their wisdom. Instead of celebrating enemies' downfall, they'd opened their doors wider, offering the same chance at redemption to those who'd tried to destroy them. Dr. Martinez, now heading their counseling program alongside Ghost, observed the deeper changes. "They're not just changing behavior," she noted. "They're healing generational trauma." The transformation reached beyond the riders. Riverside Valley itself had evolved, becoming a model for community rehabilitation. Other towns sent representatives to learn not just about reforming outlaws, but about rebuilding broken trust between people. As evening approached, Michael gathered with his core team in the barn. The same space where enemies had once plotted his destruction now hosted planning sessions for expanding their outreach. "It's not about the program anymore," he told them. "It's about proving that change is possible, that redemption is real." Emma, listening from her usual spot, smiled knowingly. "Grace would say we're growing more than crops here. We're growing hope." The new brotherhood was more than a name. It was a promise. A promise that no matter how far someone had fallen, there was always a path back to honor. That true strength came not from domination, but from lifting others up. And it all started because one farmer believed that even the hardest hearts could change when given the right soil in which to grow. 1 year after that first confrontation at Harrison Farm, Michael stood in his fields watching the sunrise. The morning mist lifted to reveal a transformed landscape, both physical and spiritual. What began as one man's stand against intimidation had grown into a movement that changed thousands of lives. The farm now served as the national headquarters for the Valley Guardians Rehabilitation Program, with centers in 12 states. The old barn had become a state-of-the-art training facility, while new buildings housed counseling centers, vocational training, and veteran support services. "Morning, Chief," Hawk called out, approaching with fresh coffee. "Got the latest numbers, over 5,000 reformed riders nationwide. Crime rates down 60% in participating counties. VAs calling it the most successful veteran rehabilitation program in history. Michael nodded, remembering Grace's words about patience and growth. Numbers don't tell the real story, though, do they? No, sir, Hawk agreed. Real stories in the details. Those details were everywhere. Tank's motorcycle shop had expanded to 3 locations, employing reformed riders and at-risk youth. Ghost's medical program now partnered with major hospitals, providing specialized care for veterans and their families. The banker had transformed his criminal empire into a legitimate business network, focusing on veteran entrepreneurship. Wire Riders chapters had become community protection units, working alongside law enforcement instead of against it. Emma's support network had grown into a national organization, with thousands of volunteers helping veterans and reformed riders rebuild their lives. Coffee and understanding, she still insisted. Best medicine there is. Sheriff Parker, reviewing the year's statistics, shook his head in amazement. Remember when we worried about keeping the peace? Now we've got former outlaws helping train our deputies. The morning's peace was interrupted by the rumble of approaching motorcycles, but these days, that sound brought hope instead of fear. A convoy of Valley Guardians pulled up, their bikes gleaming in the morning sun. They wore their new colors proudly, a rising sun over crossed wheat stalks, symbolizing growth and transformation. Special delivery, Snake Eyes announced, dismounting. First harvest from our new rehabilitation center in Montana. They're growing Grace's roses, too. The roses had become their symbol of transformation. Cuttings from that first garden, the one the Dark Riders had tried to destroy, now bloomed at every rehabilitation center. Beauty from broken ground, Emma would say. Michael walked among his transformed community. Former enemies worked side by side in the fields. Veterans found peace in the rhythm of farming. Young people learned trades from men who'd once terrorized their town. The old church basement, where they'd once hidden from violence, now hosted weekly dinners where reformed riders and townspeople shared meals and stories. Pastor Roberts had expanded his ministry to include rehabilitation chaplains, understanding that healing needed both practical and spiritual support. Dr. Martinez, reviewing their program's success with visiting psychiatrists, explained their philosophy. We don't just treat symptoms, we rebuild souls. Bill Anderson's feed store had become a regional training center, with Tank leading their vocational program. Every skill taught here, he'd tell new members, is another step away from our past. The Dark Alliance's defeat had become legend, but not for the violence avoided. Instead, they told of how enemies became brothers, how darkness turned to light. Most of those who'd come to destroy them now worked alongside them, their own transformation proving the program's power. As evening approached, Michael gathered with his core team in the original barn. The planning table where they'd once prepared for battle now held blueprints for new rehabilitation centers. You know what made this work? Ghost asked, looking around at their gathered brotherhood. It wasn't just about leaving the old life. It was about finding a better one. Emma, bringing her signature coffee and muffins, smiled knowingly. Grace always said real change is like farming. You can't force it, can't rush it. You just prepare the soil, plant the seeds, and trust in the harvest. Michael stood on his porch as the sun set, watching his transformed community. At 58, he'd seen enough of war to know the greatest victories often came without violence. The sight before him proved it. Former enemies sharing meals, veterans finding peace, young people learning from redeemed mentors. The harvest they'd reaped wasn't measured in crops alone, but in restored lives, healed families, and renewed purpose. The seeds of redemption, planted in that first confrontation, had grown into a forest of hope, and it all began because one farmer believed that even the hardest hearts could change when given the right soil in which to grow. The end. Thank you.